The 1985 Chicago Bears, the 1991 Washington Redskins, and the 1996 Green Bay Packers ranked number 1, 2, and 3 respectively in our list of the greatest Super Bowl champions of all time. The 2007 New England Patriots made it to the Super Bowl on the back of an undefeated regular season and are the greatest non-champions in the Super Bowl era. All that's well and good, but neither of these teams are represented on this list. Sustaining excellent football over any period of time is tough, but these teams did so over a 3-year period, and we're here to rank them. These are the best 3-year runs in the NFL during the Super Bowl era, and as we do, we will be using C-score to make these determinations, specifically the combined C-score of the 3 seasons in question. Much like in our video of the worst 3-year runs, there can be no overlap between seasons. A team that was great between 2000 and 2002, and again from 2010 to 2012, can both be included. But if it happens where the 3-year run took place between 2000 and 2002 and 2001 to 2003, only the better of these 3 will be included on the list. Thank you so much for joining us today, and speaking of the list, let's get on with it. We'll start things off at number 10 with the most modern team on this list, the Seattle Seahawks between 2012 and 2014. As we have our yearly breakdowns here, any year with an asterisk on it indicates the team won the Super Bowl that season. And any year with a little caret on it will display that they went to the Super Bowl but lost. In 2012, the Seahawks were excellent, pushing up against 30 in C-score at around 28.9. They really broke through in 2013. They won the Super Bowl, their C-score pushing 40 at around 38.4. They dropped down some the next season, but still made it to the Super Bowl after the 2014 season. Their C-score around 25. All told, the combined C-score 92.76. They did all this with a 36-12 record, outscoring their opponents on average by more than 10 points per game over the entire 3-year stretch. The Seahawks had been right around average in the seasons leading up to 2012, and they started that season 4-4. But they improved greatly and got up all the way to 11-5, losing their only game by a field goal. And once they made the playoffs, they won on the road in Washington before coming up just short in Atlanta, but clearly having found their way. Oh, but they did find their way once the 2013 season came along. They finished 13-3. They weren't so dominant in the playoffs, but once they got to the Super Bowl, that dominance came to the forefront. Not only winning the game by 35 points, but by leading it for 99.67% of the game clock. Even though this wasn't the record for the largest blowout in Super Bowl history, many may argue that it was indeed the most dominant performance. As defending champions coming into the 2014 season, they were a bit more vulnerable. The record only dropped to 12-4, and yes, they needed a borderline miracle against the Packers in the NFC title game. But they had the Super Bowl and their dynasty in their hands before literally throwing it away. Despite all the Super Bowls the Patriots have piled up over a 20-year period, their best run came during a 3-year era when they didn't win one, somewhat indicating the fluky nature of some of the other victories. We're looking at the New England Patriots between 2010 and 2012. 2010, they had a C-score of 35.7, an amazing score. They didn't do as well the next season, 28.3 is still excellent though, before making it to the Super Bowl, and they were just about the same team the next year, slightly improved, 28.7, missed out on the Super Bowl. Their total C-score over the period was 92.85. They went 39-9 during these 3 seasons, scoring 33 points a game, only conceding 20.5. The 2010 Patriots squad was a true powerhouse, returning to form from their undefeated season of 07. Man, they went 14-2, that's still excellent. and they allowed single-digit points in 4 of the last 5 regular season games, looking to be entering the playoffs on a big heater before they fell on their faces at home against the New York Jets team they beat by 5 touchdowns fewer than 2 months earlier. They came back looking for vengeance in 2011, and while their record was just as good almost at 13-3, the team wasn't quite as strong, but they did make it to the Super Bowl. Unfortunately for them, they lost that game to the terrible New York Giants. Their record dropped again just a little in 2012, going 12-4, and they seemed primed for a Super Bowl return. But in their rematch against the Baltimore Ravens in the AFC title game, there was no Billy Cundiff to save them, and the Ravens took it to him and knocked them out of the playoffs. They were the team of the 80s, and boy did they turn it up at the end of that decade. At number 8, the 1987 through 1989 49ers. In 1987, their C-score cleared 32, but they were unable to make it to the Super Bowl. They rectified that with a weaker team in 1988, their C-score not quite hitting 21, before coming back and doing it again in 1989 with a C-score beyond 44. And these teams clearly had a thing for precision. Their C-score during this time exactly 97 points, and they outscored their opponents by exactly 10 points per game. The 1987 season saw a player strike, with 1 game being canceled and 3 games involving replacement players. The Niners did go 3-0 in those games, but otherwise put out a 13-2 regular season record. They completely crushed it at the end. Their last 3 games were won by a combined score of 124-7. But then that Vikings game happened where they were eaten alive by Anthony Carter, and they went one and done in the playoffs. 1988 may have seen a hangover effect, and the Niners were just 6-5 at one point in the season, but they pushed that up to 10-6 to make the playoffs. They avenged the Vikings by knocking them out in the playoffs, and then they entered into a street fight with the Bengals in the Super Bowl. However, they were able to unleash the Jerry Rice cheat code, and they won that game and brought home their 3rd Lombardi of the decade. The 1989 season is where it all came together. They went 14-2 during the regular season and then embarked on the greatest playoff run in NFL history, outscoring their 3 opponents by exactly 100 points, and this was in the playoffs. These 3 teams had a combined 67% win percentage, and that Super Bowl over Denver still holds many records: 55 points scored, 45-point margin of victory. Simply put, one of the greatest single-season teams of all time. Coming in at number 7, we have the best AFL team from after the merger, and it's not even close. The Miami Dolphins from 1971 to 1973. In 71, they were very good. Their C-score cleared 21 points. They made it to the Super Bowl. In 1972, we know about that season. Their C-score cleared 33 points, and they won the Super Bowl. And in 1973, they got even better, clearing 42 in C-score, and yet again winning the Super Bowl. They are going to be the only team on this list to have made the Super Bowl in all 3 seasons. Their combined C-score 97.274. They went 36-5-1, averaging 24.8 points scored per game and allowing fewer than 12. The Dolphins had their breakout season in 1970, right after the merger, and in 71 they matched that season's 10 wins. They did make it to the Super Bowl, but once they got there, they weren't able to match up with the experienced Cowboys and took a 24-3 loss. It was in 1972 that they took that next step, not only making it to the Super Bowl, but beating the Washington Redskins, winning 14-7 and pitching a defensive shutout. And incidentally, throughout the entire season, they never did lose a game. Now, maybe they didn't go undefeated in 1973, putting up a 12-2 regular season record, but it was a better team and they stepped up to all-time status. They blew through the playoffs, winning each of their playoff games, including the Super Bowl, by at least 17 points per game, after only managing 1-score victories in their 72 playoff run. Now, you can't say this is all due to the Herschel Walker trade, but boy did that play a part. At number 6 are the Dallas Cowboys from 1992 to 1994, and they started off this run with back-to-back Super Bowl wins. In 92, their C-score was excellent, 37.8. They dropped a little bit, but were still great at 32.1 in 93. 94 saw about another 5-point drop to 27.6, the season where they were kept out of the Super Bowl. Their total C-score here, 97.619. They went an astonishing 37-11, just missing outscoring their opponents by 10 points per game, having to settle for 9.98. Having gone 1-15 just 3 seasons earlier, in 1992 the Cowboys went out to a 13-3 record. Then they went into San Francisco in the NFC title game to beat the Niners before taking Buffalo to the woodshed in Super Bowl 27, in a similar situation to the Seahawks earlier, where the point difference wasn't the biggest in Super Bowl history, but the dominance may be at the top. The 93 Cowboys limped out to an 0-2 start, in part because of Emmitt Smith's contract holdout. They still managed to finish the season at 12-4, and they went through the same playoff gauntlet the year before. This time they had the Niners at home where they beat them, and then they had Buffalo in the Super Bowl where they beat them again. They weren't quite as dominant though, explaining the slight drop in their C-score. The Cowboys were still 12-4 in 1994, but they did slip a little under a new head coach, Barry Switzer. They once again matched up with the 49ers in the NFC title game, but this time they fell short, unable to overcome a 21-0 first quarter deficit, and dreams of a three-peat were over. For those of us who were around during this time, we had some truly majestic football to watch, as our number 5 entry are the 1992 through 1994 San Francisco 49ers. Yes, the Cowboys and the 49ers were doing this at the exact same time, with the 49ers just barely ahead of them overall. In 1992 and 1993, the Niners were certainly living in the Cowboys' shadow, despite putting up C-scores of 30.9 and 27.6. 1994 was the turnaround, where they put up a monstrous 31.9, and their overall C-score was just ahead of the Cowboys, 97.723. The Niners went 37-11 during this time, putting up close to 30 points per game and allowing just over 17. Despite being 10-6 the season before, the Niners did miss the playoffs in 1991. They came roaring back in 92, going 14-2 and earning home field advantage. But despite that home field advantage, they could not beat the emerging Cowboys in the NFC title game. The middle of the 1993 season saw the Niners go 6-0, but they had a 3-3 start and a 1-3 end. At 10-6, despite smashing the Giants in the divisional round, they went to Dallas and really couldn't compete, losing in the NFC title game. In 1994, they were all in, but they were 3-2 after getting destroyed at home by the Philadelphia Eagles. However, they galvanized and ended the season 13-3. They finally got through Dallas in the NFC Championship game, and the Super Bowl against the San Diego Chargers was essentially a coronation. Coming in at number 4 are the 1966 through 1968 Baltimore Colts. Looking here at their 1966 season, this is actually the lowest single score season we're going to see in this top 10, which just demonstrates how excellent the next 2 years were. That 17.7 is dwarfed by not only the 31.7 in 67, but a near 50 in 1968 of 49.3, where they made it to the Super Bowl. During this time, they went 33-7-2. They outscored their opponents by just about 13 points per game. Their total C-score 98.879. There was nothing crazy going on with the 1966 Colts. They went 9-5, a good record, but they were in the shadow of the Packers dynasty, as was the rest of the NFL. Speaking of the rest of the NFL, the Colts went 9-3 against them, losing their 2 games to the Packers, and where only division champions made it to the playoffs, the Colts missed out. If there was nothing crazy in 66, there was lots of crazy for the Colts in 67. They actually entered the final game of the season undefeated with 11 wins and 2 ties, but they lost that game to the Rams. In doing so, they tied for the division lead and missed out on the tiebreaker, and they went from undefeated to missing the playoffs. In 1968, though, was pure dominance. They went 13-1. They rolled through the season, they rolled through the playoffs, and then the unthinkable happened in Super Bowl III against the Jets, where they fell apart, turning the ball over 5 times and couldn't get it together in a 16-7 loss, which at the time went down as the biggest upset in probably NFL history. Coming in at number 3 are the 1969 through 1971 Minnesota Vikings. Now, the Vikings joined the Colts as the only team to put up a season with under 20 points of C-score, which just proves how dominant, in this case, the previous 2 seasons were. In 1969, the Vikings made it to the Super Bowl. Their C-score cleared 43 points. In 1970, you can call it a downgrade. It's still an amazing season at 37.8. 1971, still good, no question about it, but 18.6 doesn't measure up to the other 2 seasons. They just missed cracking 100 points in total C-score, 99.649, while going 35-7. They averaged 28 and some change points per game, but look at that defense, allowing fewer than 10 points a game over a 3-year stretch. In 1969, the Vikings had the offense to match that defense, and they picked up where Baltimore left off the season before, going 12-2, rolling into the playoffs before the unthinkable happened, this time against the Kansas City Chiefs, where they were controlled pretty much the entire game and lost 23-7. In 1970, they were 12-2 once again, maybe slightly less dominant, but amazing nonetheless. The problem was, once again, in the playoffs, but this time it happened in the divisional round where they took a huge loss at home to the San Francisco 49ers. Their record came down only slightly in 1971, going 11-3. The defense was still quite dominant, but the offense stumbled, and that showed in the playoffs when they couldn't get through Dallas, losing 20-12. Our number 2 entry might be a little controversial because it took place entirely within the AFL, but the NFL recognizes those records on the same level as NFL records, and it stands as the only instance of 3 consecutive 30-plus C-scores. We're talking about the 1967 through 1969 Oakland Raiders, and as we can see here, 38.373 in a Super Bowl appearance, 33.602, and just getting by with 30.048. In this 3-year stretch, the Raiders lost only 4 games, 37 wins with 1 tie, just about scoring 31 points per game, allowing fewer than 17, and they are indeed the first team to crack 100 in C-score over the 3-year stretch, 102.023. The 67 Raiders went 13-1. Their only loss came on a cross-country trip to play the Jets in New York. They crushed the Houston Oilers to win the AFL, but once they got to the Super Bowl, they fell to both the power and the mystique of the Green Bay Packers. In 1968, they went 12-2, but they tied for the division lead and therefore had to play an extra game as a division tiebreaker. And once they won that game, they had to again go cross-country to play the rested Jets, and they missed out on Super Bowl III. In 1969, their records from the 2 previous seasons met in the middle. They were 12-1-1. They were division champions. In the AFL playoffs, they crushed the Oilers even harder than they did 2 seasons prior. But the AFL offered an extra playoff spot to second-place finishers. That led the Raiders to facing the Chiefs for the AFC title game, and that extra playoff spot led to their doom as they lost to the Chiefs. We've hit the #1 spot, and the best 3-year run by any NFL team during the Super Bowl era belongs to the Pittsburgh Steelers from 1974 to 1976. A team that was so bad before the merger. 1 playoff appearance, 0 wins, in fact 0 points scored. But they made their name during this time. In 1974, they were Super Bowl champions, their C-score clearing 25. They won the Super Bowl again in 75, taking a big leap forward, C-score of almost 40. And in 1976, despite not winning the Super Bowl, that C-score was at 38.7. Their combined C-score for the 3 seasons over 104, 104.16 to be exact. They went 32-9-1, and they were able to more than double their opponents by scoring 24.29 and allowing 11.64 points per game. 1974 didn't come out of nowhere. This was their 3rd straight season in the playoffs, and they went 10-3-1 during the regular season, and they were able to get through the Raiders in the AFC Championship game, but they didn't stop there, and they went and won their first ever Super Bowl. They came back supercharged in 1975, putting up a 12-2 record and outscoring their opponents by more than 15 points per game during the regular season. This in 1975 amounts to a 3-possession victory on average. They had a tough game in the Super Bowl against the Cowboys, but they got the job done and won back-to-back titles. 1976 must have created a little bit of a hangover because they started the season 1-4. Then they went on an absolute rampage. Over their last 11 games, they pitched 5 shutouts and they allowed 28 points in total over 11 games. They must have run out of gas during the playoffs though, because as the 3 seed, they had to go to Oakland where they couldn't get it done in the AFC title game. Looking now at the top 10 as a whole, obviously no team has ever won 3 consecutive Super Bowls, so that's not being represented here. But 4 of these teams captured 2 Super Bowls, 2 of them captured 1. Shockingly maybe, 4 of them captured none, including our numbers 4, 3, and 2 entries. If those teams could have won maybe 1 or 2 Super Bowls during that time, they may have supplanted the Steelers on this list. But that wasn't meant to be, and Pittsburgh takes its rightful place at the top. Perhaps I'm a little biased, so be it if that's true, but it should be pointed out that the 49ers are the only franchise to make 2 separate appearances on this list. Thank you so much for joining us today and for making it this far into the video. Give it a thumbs up if you liked it and feel free to share it around. And if you've yet to do so, please consider subscribing to the channel and dinging that bell to be notified of all future videos. Was this list about what you expected? Were there other teams you thought should be here? Do you think not winning a Super Bowl disqualifies a team from consideration? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this or anything else on your mind down in the comments section below. You're an amazing audience, and I can't tell you how lucky I feel to have you here. Thank you again so very much, and until next time, I hope you have an awesome day.